Okay, we are live. Chris, how you doing?
I'm very good, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. I got my
Thank you.
second
Thank you
second
for
cup of
having me.
coffee. Oh yeah, definitely. Okay, let's start this off by fill me in and everybody else in on what you do as far as this topic of nutrition goes.
As far as this topic of nutrition goes, so I've been an online health and fitness coach for probably 10, 11 years. There was a little bit of an overlap there as I transitioned from a sort of a corporate job into starting my own company and working for myself. So I say sort of approximately 10, 11 years. And I specialize in helping women lose weight. And the demographic that tends to lean into the content that I produce, it tends to be more menopausal women, women sort of 40 to 55 years old. So that's where the bulk of my experience lies. I did also do quite a lot of gym floor work. I did also personal training for a while, again, in that overlap of moving online sort of 10, 11 years ago. So I do have experience sort of coaching other demographics, but that's predominantly what I do. And I've been sort of very honored to have worked with so many people over that time, maybe about 1,700 clients.
Oh wow, okay. And what form of education does one go through to get certified for what you do?
Oh, in the UK, I can only speak for the UK. I'm not sure how it transitions to other countries. But we have what I would call a quite broken system in that you could be qualified to do health coaching with almost like a 1 week crash course, maybe $500 worth of education. You could sit, binge watch a couple of modules, ace a multiple choice test online, and then be sort of qualified as a health coach. I wanted to run my business ethically in the same way that I try and eat ethically and live my life ethically. So I went a sort of slightly longer route. My course was sort of 6 months of pretty much full-time education. That covered practical aspects in the gym, nutrition, and then sort of add-on modules, life coaching sort of things, bits and bobs to sort of complement that. And then just a continual professional development on top of that, because I don't think you can ever have learned it all.
Yeah. Yep.
So
And
that's me.
there's Yeah, gotcha. Okay. And then real quick, since you mentioned the people that you mostly help would be women, and then specifically menopausal women, I find it interesting because when I look into health and nutrition, I just look for where the science leads me. But for some reason, if I'm looking into whenever I am tracking down somebody that gives advice or I'm hearing thoughts and whatnot, for some reason with me, and I'm not sure if this is most people, I tend to go to males because I'm male. And so I imagine that males most often will be giving information for how males can be the healthiest they can be, and then females for females. Now, most like one of my favorite doctors that shares information is Dr. Michael Greger, who I'm sure you're familiar with, for nutritionfacts.org. Now, he doesn't focus on just men or anything. He focuses on everybody, and then we'll share different things for each separate thing. But in a lot of cases, it is that way, especially with like workout stuff, because I'm guessing workouts are different. And so I guess I'm just curious, do you find that there's ever a case where somebody will come to you, but they will mention that normally they go to women for that? I don't know if that's it's a weird question, but I just that's just what popped into my mind is that I imagine women would go to women for fitness training.
Do you know what? I do find that the industry has gone through sort of ebbs and flows, and I think it's probably fair to discuss why I originally started helping women. I had a passion in my own sort of hobbies and I suppose recreation for obstacle course racing, like Tough Mudder, things like that.
Hmm.
And I thought, as I'm qualifying, I'm going to help people with that. And that was my passion. I thought I'll do boot camp style stuff, like military fitness style boot camps and outdoors getting muddy and those sorts of workouts. And for some reason, as I was putting my marketing out, I noticed that like 99% of the inquiries I were getting was from women of that sort of 40 to 55, and all pretty much plant-based, because I was vegetarian at the time. And I don't know why that transition happened, but it just felt logical to be moving towards that if I was constantly being asked for it. Not necessarily the vegan coaching that came a couple of years later. I've been vegan probably 8 or 9 years, but in that transition phase, people didn't want really the boot camp stuff that I was advertising. They were like, "Hey, Chris, I heard you've worked with people at plant-based, can you help me with this?" And I think geography had a little bit to do with it. In my area at the time, I'm pretty sure that if you Googled my name or vegan personal trainer, I was top of Google for several years because I was probably first to market in that part of England, potentially. So maybe it was just for lack of choice.
Gotcha. Interesting. That's cool, though. Okay, so the first thing I want to ask you, which we've talked about a little bit off camera, but when it comes to health claims, like what people should do for health, fitness, nutrition, all the different things, there's different things that convince people that things should work. Some people are like, their friend will say, "I did this thing and it worked," and then they'll go, "Oh, okay, I want to do it." How do you approach being convinced of a health claim?
This ties really well with the question that I saw you post on your social media a week or so ago. I think there's different layers that I would use as almost evidence, because I think obviously anyone who is working with something as important as other people's health, we have to follow evidence and we have to follow studies. And in my opinion, there is like a gold standard, isn't there? There's, meta-analysis of multiple studies, and preferably studies that haven't been commissioned by people with a vested interest. So I always think that's the top tier standard. But I also think that we could pay a lot of attention to almost when there becomes a point whereby observation is relevant. If it's 2 or 3 people, it's coincidence. If it's 1,000 people, I think that then becomes weighty in itself as a source of evidence, beyond sort of anecdotal. So for me, it's almost trying to balance those two. And I'd like to think that I sit somewhere in between. I don't like to be swayed completely by evidence, especially when I can't verify where it's come from. I like to trust my own eyes as well.
Gotcha. Cool. I like that. Okay. So you, in your years of what you do and leading up to that, you have learned how to read studies, understand what they mean. And so the majority of things that you accept as true health claims are things that you've personally researched and read the studies.
Yeah, I suppose so. And my science education, we call it college up to 18 years old here, but I think for you is college up to 21 years old?
So we just have like grade school, middle school, high school. High school ends at 12, and then what I believe you guys call university, we call college.
Okay, yeah. So yeah. For me, sort of up to the age of 18, that's where my science education ended. So I couldn't claim, like I have medical background or medical experience, or, I've got tens of thousands of hours worth of experience of reading studies. I do try and keep up with them as much as possible. But also I'm just busy with a lot of clients. I think there's some people that almost get bogged down, and you see a lot of this on the internet, people that will be able to argue with you what the most current meta-analysis of a specific data point was, but then they've got zero practical experience actually applying it out in the trenches in the real world. So again, I'm somewhere in between. I think it's important to find that balance of trying to keep up to date with the knowledge as much as possible, but then also being out there and applying it and seeing how it works in the real world. Because I learned that quite quickly. You take something from a well verified website that's perhaps medically verified or clinically checked, and you apply it and it doesn't work, and you go, okay, well, maybe that was me applying it wrong. I'll tell you what, I'll apply it another 10 times and find a spread. And you go, oh, hang on, it still didn't work. So then you have to start applying your own sort of nous, don't you?
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Well, since it's in the title, I'm going to bring up protein as an example. Let's say, you've read a handful of studies on different things. You were convinced by various different things. And let's say somebody that's is working with you comes to you with the question I posted that you saw on social media, where I said that I've been convinced that what was it, 0.8 grams per, I can't remember exactly what it is, but let's just say that I said that if a healthy weight for me is 160 pounds, that I've been convinced that I only need 64 grams of protein, and then a day. And I know this is probably throwing you off because you guys don't go by pounds, and
I can do the maths.
and pounds would mean money for you guys, so it's not even just not the same word. But yeah. Okay, so if you can do the math, then we're good to go. Okay, so if somebody came to you saying that this is what they are under the impression is the right thing, and let's say that you thought they needed more, but you couldn't remember for sure if you just have this general idea or if the current studies align with your thought, would you then, to answer their question, go find a handful of studies and read them real quick? Or are there certain topics that you feel like you're pretty certain on? Like, how would you handle that if somebody came to you with that?
That's a great question. Because a lot of the coaching I do, we take almost a rounded approach. It's not just fitness and exercise and nutrition. I do a lot of lifestyle and mindset coaching as well. It's almost like a sort of broad spectrum life coaching approach. So my first question automatically will be, is this person going to be receptive to the information I'm going to give them? Because 90% of the time, that answers a no, and I'm not going to waste my time discussing that with that person. Some people don't have the capacity to change their opinion. And I won't argue with them. My time's too precious, and they'll just end up feeling frustrated and hating you, and it's a dead end. So that's always the first question I'm going to ask myself. If I think that person has the capacity to change their opinion, I'm going to ask myself, what's that person most interested in? And I'm going to try and appeal to that sense. So if that person's most interested in heart health, or they're most interested in muscle gain, or they're most interested in saving animal lives, or I'll probably try and appeal to them so that they can assimilate that information in a context that they're familiar with and happy with, and going to perhaps even get excited about. They can see a benefit to themselves and more likely to take that opinion on, right?
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay. I like that.
How about you?
How about me? I guess... Yeah, no, I mean, I guess I definitely agree if I was talking with somebody. So I don't know if I ever have any intention to have the profession you have, but I do have a passion for what I'm doing, whether there was money or not involved. I do like having conversations with people. And if somebody did not care about their health at all, and their only focus whatsoever was a moral side of when it comes to animals or various different things, then if I was discussing something with them, I would discuss the morals. I wouldn't say, well, I think you should be healthy, so you should do this. I would say like, yeah, if we look at this, let's take a certain thing. Let's say that we knew that everywhere lentils were grown, harms a certain amount of animals because of the pesticides that are needed for them, but you don't need those same pesticides for for beans, like chickpeas, black beans, then I would say even if the lentils had a better health outcome, that if their only focus is to harm less sentient beings, then they should eat the inferior chickpeas. They're not really inferior. I'm just hypothetically. But yeah, if I was talking to somebody about health, because those are my topics. I like to talk about moral philosophy and health. And if I was talking to somebody about health, I would completely leave out everything else. It would just be what is truly healthiest that we can be aware of. Even if I would say that I think it's immoral to eat cows or chickens, I want to be able to say that it is healthier to eat cow flesh than chicken flesh. So same thing with non-animal products that might cause harm to the environment or whatever. I like the idea of breaking down the science of how the human body is affected by these foods. And so I think that would be, I think it would always come down to the science, because I wouldn't be worrying if like a client is going to be thrown off by my judging them. It would just be me talking to an individual and saying, this is like, this science is here. So if your religion is telling you don't eat apples, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you apples are unhealthy. You can not eat them. But, and so anyways, I would just go off of the science while being as reasonable as possible.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. I also think context, if we add context to your question, that's very important to me, because I like to help people, and I've not got, an inconsequential amount of experience. I've got a lot of experience of helping a lot of people, and I like to do it. So sometimes on social media, my first instinct when I see somebody perhaps sharing a misnomer, something that's factually incorrect, something that's borderline, maybe correct, incorrect, but out of context, my first instinct is to jump in. And I sometimes have to hold myself back from that, because I recognize that actually that's not why a lot of people post on social media. A lot of people post for confirmation bias. They just like that echo chamber of their bubble, everybody patting them on the back. And, we see that a lot in the activism space. We see a lot of people doing the same thing in the health space, just trying to reinforce their own views without really ever challenging themselves. We see that a lot. I'm not going to add anything to that conversation by coming in and basically telling them they're wrong. I've been in that situation, perhaps as a less experienced coach and just as a younger, sort of less experienced human, and made that mistake, because I automatically have that sort of trying to help people, but not necessarily being able to appreciate that, hang on, that person doesn't want to be told they're wrong. They don't care if they're wrong. They just want to continue in that trend for whatever reason. So adding context to your question, it would be dependent on who was asking me. Yeah. Is it someone I've got a good rapport with online? Is it somebody who's genuinely got a capacity to change? Is it a client? Is it a stranger? If it's a stranger, I'd probably just go, whatever, because I don't know them, and I can't claim to be able to help someone out of context. Someone's actually solicited me for information. They're receptive, they're open, they're sort of ready for change. Then maybe I'll challenge them on their beliefs. But I'm learning to grow more and more wary of that. I think the very, very direct approach isn't as effective as I used to think it was, or as I see some people think it is.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, one thing I didn't think of that just popped into my head now would be before acting upon their question would be finding out why they feel that way. If somebody comes to you and says, that they're under the understanding that they need this much protein, instead of you having to take your time to read some more studies about it, you could say, what convinced you? Like, is there a study that convinced you? And then if they send you that, you can read that study and see if you have something to tell them about, the meat company Tyson paid for this study, and here's why there's these errors or whatever. And or if they say, oh, I watched this video on YouTube and this guru said this thing, they can send it to you and you can look and you can go, okay, they cite their sources. This is accurate information. Or you can go, oh, there's no sources here, and here's a handful of things to show why this is incorrect or whatever. So I guess that's always good. It's always good to ask a question back to see why somebody thinks the way they think before answering their question, maybe.
Very, very much so. And your conversation starter on your Facebook was fantastic. And you obviously surround yourself with some pretty smart people, because there were some great comments that came back. And I was really surprised at the quality of some of the comments for a Facebook page, because most people, you can attract a lot of flack, you can attract a lot of carnivores or haters or, antagonists. There were some really good questions that came back. I was reading them just before this call. Some people asking for more context, asking what type of exercise you do so they could answer the question in more detail. All that sort of stuff I think is really relevant. And I think it was an example of how some questions should be answered, rather than just assuming that we can take the question on face value, because I've made that mistake before as well. Sometimes there's more at play. So that's important as well, for sure.
Yeah. And I think social media could be a whole topic in and of itself. I have a love-hate relationship with it, mostly hate. But as you've seen with comments on Facebook, that Facebook, which is my only Facebook now, I used to have one that was for a couple hundred people that were just friends and family, and then one that's for all the things I talk about, like on YouTube channel and stuff. And so this one's just randomly collecting friends over time, and oftentimes it'll be through vegan related things, because it'll be like, oh, this person is friends with 500 of your friends. So it means vegans finding other vegans through the internet, which is really cool. But I would say half the people on there are not vegan, half are vegan. Maybe something like 40% are left-leaning and 60% are right-leaning, and just a good variety of people. And I definitely see my share of pointless, just angry people hiding behind a screen. But the majority of people on there, I think, are like what you were describing, which is great. Just people being open-minded and wanting to hear ideas, share ideas. And anyways, that's the percentage of love in that love-hate relationship is that. And I've made great connections that way. So as much as I think it's important for people to limit their social media time, and by social media time, I do not mean conversations like this. People should do more of face-to-face, seeing each other, communicating, and even listening or watching educational things like on YouTube is great. But I think being behind a screen where somebody can't see you, you're typing up an idea, and then it's just yelling back and forth at each other, I think is showing to be a pretty harmful thing that I think most people should figure out ways to stay away from that.
I agree wholeheartedly. You hit on a great point earlier when you mentioned that not everybody on your page is vegan. Now, when I first started my journey into veganism, I pretty much isolated myself amongst just vegans. I found being around meat eaters and the sort of, the stereotypical hate that some people come across, and the, some of the ignorant comments, I couldn't necessarily separate them from the good conversation points, and it just triggered me. So I separated myself into an almost completely vegan bubble. Gotcha. Then I remember one of my coaches, because I have a coach, for my business, for my life, for, my health. And my business mentor at the time, he says, Chris, you want to help more people transition to veganism? And I was like, yeah, for sure. He says, well, how are you going to do that if you only surround yourself with other vegans? And I was like, it was just like a little miniature light bulb moment. So obvious when you say it out loud, but at the time, because I was in a little insular bubble, I wasn't registering that. And I think that actually the way that I try and communicate and the way that I try and live certain areas of my life, that's really my activism, because I found that through being healthy, through being successful, through being communicative, open, just generally amiable, trying to be a nice guy, people will trust you. And I have regular messages from non-vegans that come and say to me, "Hey, Chris, I'm thinking about this. How can you help? Or have you got any ideas? Or where should I start? And do you have any resources?" Those sorts of dialogues make the time, effort, energy that it takes to be online, through the sort of challenges that you just highlighted, it make it so worth it. So for me, that's really what keeps me online, is having those conversations and being able to help people transition as well. Massively important to me.
Yeah. 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 And in the same way that if somebody, say, is not vegan, is ever going to become vegan, they need to have their ideas challenged. It's the same the other way around. Like if anybody should be convinced they're right about something, it's by looking at the other side as much as possible. No matter what the topic is, it could be the topic of like abortion. You shouldn't be wanting to just talk to people that agree with you. Your goal in life should be to talk to everybody that can maybe change your mind. And so same thing with veganism. I'm vegan. I think it's immoral to harm animals, especially for taste pleasure. And if I'm wrong, I want to be convinced as soon as possible by all the people that might have ideas of why I'm wrong, not of the people that think I'm right. Like it doesn't matter if it's 10 people or 10 billion people that think I'm right. I can only really be challenged if I find that other side. And so I think that's good. And I talk to many non-vegans, and one cool thing that you find is that a lot of people I've talked to want to be vegan. They want it to be illegal to eat animals so that can force them to be vegan. But morally, they think it's wrong to harm animals, but they have been conditioned their whole life to do it, and they do it. And they say like, "Oh, I wish I could stop," or I might cut back a little bit. And it's so interesting because you can't really have a debate with those people because like mentally they're on the same page as you. They think it's wrong, and it really just comes down to the fact that it's a legal action that people that are addicted to it are going to do. And it's like it's a conversation that's hard to have, but it also kind of gives you hope because it shows you if everybody felt that way, then everybody would stop. And so that's why I like to talk to non-vegans, and I even talk to like hunters a lot. And it's very fascinating to see different people's take on morals, where somebody thinks it's horrible to have animals like locked up in factory farms, but if an animal's just lived its life, and somebody thinks that they need meat to survive, and they shoot a deer in the wild, like they're almost viewing it in an ethical way. And I know we like to shut down those people a lot, but I like to stay as open-minded as possible. So like when they tell me this, and as they take a life and they kind of are very saddened by it, and they like thank that life or whatever, ultimately I think with moral conversations, those people would not even feel to that level of how they feel. But I think it's fascinating to see how more empathetic maybe some hunters might be than your average person that just buys ground beef at the store or something. I just went off to a ramble, but yeah, sorry.
I like your train of thought, and it sort of got my brain firing on a slightly different angle to where we started off. But I've got a question for you based on what you've just said. Is that all right?
Yeah, for sure.
I have an issue with certain aspects of the vegan industry and the vegan scene as a whole. And I want to ask you what your thoughts are on the side of the vegan scene that push for an abolitionist approach. When you were just giving that example of perhaps someone who's, querying or, vegan curious, have you ever said to anybody, listen, stop being soft, stop eating animals overnight, you can do it, anything else is failure. Think of the animals, just do it. What you're waiting for. What are your views on that approach?
Yeah, I hate that. I absolutely. So I think like I won't name names, but let's just say there are probably two of the most famous YouTubers that do table talks where they talk to people out in public. And one of them is Earthling Ed, who I love. And the other one, I won't mention the name, but that person and others will kind of do that approach where they'll like have a debate with somebody on the streets, and then they'll just tell them how horrible they are. And the person's like, well, I'm thinking about cutting back. And then they're like, cutting back isn't good enough. And that angry approach, I don't think is good. I don't think it's ultimately the right approach. But I think what the best approach is working towards what causes the least harm. And so that's why I think the main focus of vegans should be to work towards legal change in small doses, working towards outlawing small cages and working towards bigger cages, working towards like, I believe in the UK, I've heard Peter Singer talk about this, that there are certain legal limits to how many like hectares of farmland you need for chickens. And in the US, they can be crammed into really small spaces. And even though eventually we want like a way bigger, better outcome, you can't change all the hearts and minds. But if something is illegal, that's like the ultimate goal. Like if somebody wants gay people to be able to get married, then you want gay marriage legal. You don't need to make every single person that thinks it's wrong to be gay suddenly think it's right to be gay. I would rather have rights than to have a higher percentage of people like me. And so same thing with animals, same thing if people compare it to slavery or whatever. You want as the least amount of harm as possible. If slaves still existed today in the US or the UK, then if you could make certain practices be like, let's say you could brand your slave, it would be better to focus on things like making it illegal to brand your slave than to say the only thing I will fight for is ending slavery, even if it seems likely that that won't happen for 10,000 years. That's still the only thing I'll fight for. That seems ridiculous to me because I think branding animals. I don't know if they brand animals in the UK, but like here, you take a hot iron with whatever your company's logo is, get it in the fire, and you brand the animals. Now, I think if every vegan focused on talking to people on the street about, hey, let's talk about this a lot. Let's not brand animals. Let's do something more humane. I'm guessing like a ear tag is more humane. And then you can get all the non-vegans on your side. And then these slow changes will happen. And similar to how in the 1930s, everybody had a fox fur over their shoulders with the actual fox head there. Nobody would wear that today, even the non-vegans. And so if you slowly work towards getting people to make small changes, anyways, that's what I think is best.
I agree wholeheartedly. It was a slightly loaded question, but it's one that I've come across a few people asking recently. So I wanted to sort of get your opinion on it. But I feel exactly the same about that sort of step-by-step approach. I found out something recently, and I don't have the numbers to hand. Someone's watching this who's smarter than me will probably correct me on this. But in the UK, somebody did a quick study, and they worked out how much the dairy industry is subsidized, because it's government subsidized. And they worked out that if you removed a seventh of the dairy income, as in, let's say everybody went meat-free Monday, just as an example, the amount of subsidy needed to balance that seventh day of missing revenue would put the dairy industry on a very limited timeline. And I forget, it was something like 14, 15 months. So now here's where it gets interesting, because as vegans, we have all got vegan, in our blood for different reasons, ethical, environmental, health, etc., etc. But we all would agree that we want to cause less suffering. To bounce off your step-by-step sort of comment and then those small incremental changes, if we got everybody to go meat and dairy free on a Monday in the UK, well, the industry would collapse in 15 months. Why aren't we campaigning for that rather than complete abolition?
Yeah.
because
No,
that makes more sense to me. It seems a smaller, more achievable step.
yeah. No, it blows my mind. I don't get it. I really need to just like lock myself in a cabin for a week and try to figure out the best way to explain it to people further. Because yeah, that what you're saying is exactly right. And I talk to so many people that are the complete opposite. I had this conversation with this lady that was vegan and an abolitionist, and she was comparing it to slavery and whatnot. And I gave her an example of why it's good to work towards different things. Because in the same sense that you could you can make it illegal to cram pigs into this tiny cage. You can say they have to have at least this much space and make it more. Is the other way around. If you imagine that the conditions were even worse, if they were worse than they are now, would you still not fight for them? And that's kind of what the claim is you never fight for their conditions. You just fight for total abolition. And so I gave an example saying, what if in the future they figure out how they can cut off the legs of cows and put the cows on like a shelf and just pump fluids into them that like basically they're just feeding them with tubes, but the cows never go anywhere and they just fatten them up on a shelf, but the cow is alive and miserable and just having this horrible life of suffering on shelves, and no cows are walking around anymore. Would you, as a vegan, if you could fight for that and maybe get that changed, would you do it? And she said no. She said you demand total abolition and that's it. And it just blows my mind. Yeah. And most people, I would say 70% of the vegans that I talk to or that like comment on stuff on my channel, most of them are on her side.
Wow. Yeah, I think I'd take examples like that on a case by case basis. I would have loved to sort of seen that conversation pan out, just to have full context. But
I'll send you a link.
Please do. I'll try not to join in. I'll try to read without wading in too heavily. But no, I love those sorts of conversations because while some people might look at that and go, "Yeah, that's strangely hypothetical," those sorts of scenarios are never going to happen. It's a waste of time even thinking about it. I can also see the argument for yes, but it's the theory, it's the concept, it's the principle, because that then has an opportunity to really map out and influence how we make decisions, which are based in reality. Is that making more ethical choices, even though they're not perfect? Does it change the way that we interact with other vegans? Does it change the way we interact with ourselves and our own beliefs? All important, all really important.
Yeah. Yeah. But real quick, because we got sidetracked talking about more vegan related things, and I have a handful of health related ones. But I spend most of my time talking about vegan stuff, so we should definitely keep doing that on a future talk. But okay, so here's what I'm going to do as far as health goes. So you've seen my posts on social media about health. I'm slowly getting into it, and I've been getting into it over the past few years, reading many health books, podcasts, whatnot. And what I'm going to start doing, because I'm learning how to read and understand studies, I'm going to make a list of everything I've been convinced of as far as health goes. And then as I talk to people and they can see my list, I'll just have a document that's available to be seen. If they want to challenge something and go like, oh, this thing that you've been convinced of, let me show you why you shouldn't be convinced of it. And they can show me studies that show that that might be wrong. I'm going to do that in the very near future. In fact, after my last talk I had an hour ago, and then this one, in between there, I was going to write up a handful of things I've been convinced of to be the start of that list to mention to you and to hear your thoughts on them. But then what I decided was instead, I'm going to have you tell me things that if you were writing a list, what you would say that you've been convinced of.
Okay.
And then maybe that will influence elements of my list. So examples would be, I'll tell you what I was writing down, but we won't talk about these specifically unless you feel like they're on the top of your list. But the first thing that just popped into my head was I've been convinced that going to bed within an hour of the same time every night is best. So if you're a person that can like fall asleep around 10, then it's probably not best to stay up till midnight or 1 in the morning on the weekends, and then on the weekdays you go to bed at 10. It's probably best for your sleep health to go to bed within an hour of 10 o'clock every night, or within an hour of 8 o'clock or midnight or whatever. Another one was I've been convinced that stepping outside within a half hour of waking to get like sunlight in your eyes is very good for setting your circadian rhythm and to help with sleep later on. A random example is I've been convinced that when it comes to flax and chia seeds, that the healthiest approach is to have them ground up, and that your body can absorb the nutrients better if they're ground, because if they're whole, your body won't break it down. So those are a couple random examples. Obviously, the flax and chia are further down on the list than some like bigger topics. But I'm going to have a list of everything I've been convinced of. And so anyways, if you were going to form a list of things you've been convinced of, and the ones you were going to mention now were stuff that would be maybe more towards the top of if somebody was unhealthy, they didn't exercise, they didn't eat well, they didn't get good sleep, and they came to you and just said, I don't know where to start. I want to do one thing tomorrow to start changing habits. And this one habit I'm going to do tomorrow and I'm going to keep doing. And what might be something like the first thing you would tell them, like, start doing this?
Can I clarify before I jump in?
Of course.
When you said have been convinced of, is that alluding to perhaps something I've then found out to be incorrect? Because I've done that before. Or do you mean something that I still stand by?
Still stand by, yeah. So you are currently convinced of. I don't know why I use that wording of have been. But anyways, yes.
Okay, good. I thought I'd clarify because I could talk about things that I've been convinced about, but also then found out I'm wrong on.
Yeah.
Let's focus on the things that I stand by. Okay, easiest way for me to do this. When I coach, because you mentioned a client context, I tend to work in 5 areas: exercise, nutrition, lifestyle, mindset, community. Because we call them 5 pillars. It's very easy to give 1 or 2 changes within each of those 5 pillars that make just massive progress. So exercise, I always look at where that person is, and then I think about what I could do to improve where they are. If they were to mark themselves on 10 as to how active they are, I'm thinking, what can I do to move them a point? They mark themselves a 6. I go, cool. What can we do to get you up to a 7? 99% of the time, that's lift weights. Not enough people lift weights in a progressive manner. So that is one thing that I'm convinced of. There is not one demographic that doesn't benefit from lifting weights progressively of any age. Number one.
Okay. I like that. Okay. So what if a person told you that they like the idea of staying away from anything that would be considered equipment, of exercise equipment? Now, obviously, with what you do, you are very supportive of exercise equipment. But what would you consider the most natural way to get the exact same effect of lifting weights without anything that would be considered exercise equipment?
The reason why I like exercise equipment, let's say, for example, dumbbells, because you go to a gym and you've got dumbbells from 2 pounds to 100 pounds in 1 pound increments, and you can very gradually and systematically get stronger, because you can lift 10 reps one day and then the next day you go up and lift 10 reps, but of something that's a pound heavier, and you can progressively and very systematically in very small increments manage yourself getting stronger. You can use body weight, but the increments that you can work to are less accurate and they're harder to predict. and it's harder to isolate individual muscle groups. So if someone came to me and they said, Chris, I've got no intention of ever stepping foot in a gym. I'm never going to buy a set of dumbbells for my house. Don't even ask. I probably wouldn't ask. I'd encourage them to do bodyweight exercise, calisthenics, calisthenics, and I would say manage your expectations, because the results you want won't be achieved without lifting weights.
Okay. So somebody could do push-ups, which wouldn't need the equipment. They could go down to a park and attempt to do pull-ups. Somebody starting out probably won't get a pull-up in. A pull-up on monkey bars, and then they could do some squats. That I've recently learned about. Is it called rucking, where you have a weighted backpack, or some people will carry rocks up mountains or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a handful of different approaches. I guess what we could call a weight is a uniformly structured rock. And so if somebody's going to pick up a rock, one thing somebody could do is they can have a decent sized rock that's heavy for them, but they can do it, and they can lift it up, turn around, set it behind them, lift it up, turn around, set it behind them, and do a squat with it or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I'm just my brain is going to this thought because I have nothing against gym equipment, but I think some people like to go on the more natural side of things. Not that it matters.
Challenge that, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I have worked with clients that perhaps love their gardening. And they're like, Chris, I don't need to lift weights because I was doing 3 hours digging in the garden, and I do that a couple of times a week. And I go, right, well, great. How much earth did you move? And they go, I don't know. So I'm like, well, how do you know you're going to lift more tomorrow? And they go, I don't know. So technically you're doing less work. So what's your plan? You want to get weaker? And just explaining it in those really simple numerical sentences, it often gets people just thinking enough to be open to the idea. And I'm really big on leading by example. So within the community, if we have people that are doing very, very well and so successful, that often inspires other people that are perhaps lacking confidence. I've had people that have been on a coaching call with me first time. Chris, I'm never touching a dumbbell ever. Don't ask, never stepping foot in a gym. And now they go to the gym 3 times a week. They do classes. They love it. They've bought equipment for home. And 6 months later, they've made that transformation. So I think showing people the benefits and also educating them on, well, hang on, if your way worked, if that gardening was enough, why are we having this conversation?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Okay, well, let me kind of come up with an idea that could maybe be something that could work, but it's like a middle ground. You're familiar with testing for VO2 max, right?
Yes.
Where you have a machine hooked up to you and you're running on a treadmill as fast as you can. And I don't know too much about it. I'm fascinated by it. I follow a doctor named Peter Attia that talks about it a lot. And if somebody was just trying to improve their health and they go, they start walking more and then they start jogging more and then they're running, and but they don't time themselves, and so they're doing the equivalent of calisthenics versus weights or whatever. They're running more, and they want to go from probably initially having a horrible VO2 max to having a better one. And then if every month or 3 months they go and have their VO2 max tested, and then they can see that they're improving, I wonder if maybe the middle ground for somebody that wants to do a non-equipment version of getting the benefits of lifting weights could be that they check their max with weights at the end of each month to see if they've been doing something that they're improving. So if somebody wants to carry a giant boulder up a hill as their form of a more natural weightlifting, then at the end of every month, they can go to a gym, get some dumbbells or whatever, or do a bench press, and they can see what their max is. And then they go back to their natural calisthenic-y stuff. And then at the end of the next month, they can see if their max is higher with the dumbbells. That'd be interesting.
That's one way of measuring progress, for sure. A common one in the personal training world is a scale called RPE, which is rate of perceived exertion. So someone who, let's say it's the first push-up they've ever done, and you get, I'll use a woman in her 50s as an example, because that's the sort of demographic I work with. And maybe they're on their knees and they can just about squeeze out one push-up. And it took 10 on 10 exertion. They've literally got no more fuel in the tank after that. But then a month or two down the line, they do another one, and it's like, well, actually, that was a little bit quicker. I think I only had to put in 8 on 10 effort. So RPE, rate of perceived exertion, is really good. Doesn't demand you change weights. It just gives you an indication of how much effort that person feels that they're putting in. A little bit more objective than or subjective than numbers, but it helps.
Gotcha.
In some circumstances.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay. Well, awesome. Okay, so I wrote down that, and I liked that talk we just had on that. What's number 2?
Number 2, things that I am convinced of. The need for community, for health, physical and mental. That was recently backed up when I watched a documentary called Blue Zones. I don't know if you've seen it. Really interesting.
You know what? I might have only seen a couple episodes of it. There might be like 4, and I've only seen 2. But yeah, it was what I've seen is really good.
When I first got into coaching and trying to sort of build a community of vegans to, lead by example, and to be strong and be advocates for animals by being healthy and successful and all that good stuff, I remember stumbling across a study which showed people that train in groups live on average 7 years longer, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. I'm going back 10 years. And then I saw the Blue Zones, and I was like, man, they've proved it. This is not legitimate. People that hang out in groups of like-minded individuals, we live longer, happier lives. So for me, I I live out in the countryside, middle of nowhere. It's a very isolated little community. So for me, I have to be proactive about going finding vegans to hang out with, people that are like-minded. Some of that's social online, some of that's real world in person, but having that balance and integrating, not isolating. I'm a firm believer that isolation and sort of that hermit approach is a trauma response. No one who's healthy ever goes, I want to be alone.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I think there's a lot of benefits that can come out of it. I'm going to list a couple, and then I'm curious to hear what you think is what you're calling the most important element of it. So when you have a community, you, first of all, you just don't feel alone. So maybe you're less stressed. And then second of all, if it's a community of health related stuff, then you have people that have your back, that like send you a reminder, like a reminder text, or just tell you in person, like, don't forget, don't fall off the wagon today, eat healthy. And cause it's really good to have each other's backs on these kind of things. And oh man, I had a list of like 5 things in my head, and I only got 2 out, and I just forgot the others. But
that's because we've been talking really. And this is your second podcast today, right?
Yeah. I used to do like 3 or 4 a day, but I've cut back to 2. But yeah, I wasn't sure. Is it kind of all the above of all the benefits that come from community, or is it mostly why you have it at the top of the list is just socializing, humans needing to communicate with each other, even if there was no like health conversation or anything in mind?
I think that there's just so much potential good things that can come from communities. Innovation. We've proved that more innovation comes from groups of people. That's why, if you look at economy in cities and development and science, a lot of that happens in built up areas, funding, etc. You look at health-wise, people that hang out in communities live longer. You look at mental health, people that have other support networks tend to be less medicated. You look at, it's like you can look at it from a few different angles, and there's not really any downside. So for me, that's why it's at the top. But I think number 3 on the list, moving away from health, if that's all right.
Moving away from health.
Yeah.
Maybe it's all right. Let's see. because the list is of you mean 3 on the list of community, or 3 on the list of
3 on the list? three on the list of things that I'm convinced of.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. So the question was mostly like, what things have you been convinced of in the realm of health?
Okay.
But well, let's take a break from that because I'm curious what you were going to say of not health related.
Well, I can slant it. I'll just change my language. I'll change the context.
Okay.
Uh,
I'm okay
it,
with
it,
whatever. Yeah.
it's in reference to veganism.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the vegan or the approach that a lot of people take towards advocating for animals and advocating for veganism is fundamentally flawed by not being broad spectrum and only focusing on ethics.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
to elaborate a little bit further and to probably clarify. If I have a person who is in front of me, who I have an opportunity to discuss with, and perhaps all they care about is finances, they're not
Mm-hmm.
going to care whether this burger saves one life, this burger saves 10. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to care. They're just worried about, well, which one makes more money, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you're talking to somebody about longevity, perhaps they've got a heart condition and they're like, man, I'd love to be able to make it to 60 years old. Well, talking about animal health, not gonna, this burger's, if you eat this, is gonna, you're gonna add 5 years onto your life. That's
Mm-hmm.
probably
Yeah.
probably a little bit more important than saying, well, you're gonna save someone else's life. They don't care. They've just been told they've got angina.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
No,
that
I completely agree. Yeah.
I think that's something that's really important to me and something that I'm focusing more on in my own vegan journey, is to recognize not everybody does it for the same reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it would be good to encourage others to maybe come to that same conclusion. Because you'll see a lot of people, there is very popular amongst vegans to talk about vegan for the animals and anybody that's vegan for health, horrible people, whatever. Um, any of these ideas where it's talking poorly about people that might be trying to do better, it can't be beneficial. But at the same time, like hoping that any movement will ever be perfect is also unlikely. But yes, I think sharing these ideas, I like to think that some people that lean towards doing it the negative way might hear something like you just said and go, oh, that's a good point. I should relax on my harsh judgment.
Mm.
But yeah,
I'll, I'll 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 clarify that point before I give my last one, because I noticed the time we're probably coming
yeah.
towards the end of this. I I'm 40 this year. I've just
Mm-hmm.
turned 40, and I went vegetarian. I just turned 10, so I've
Mm-hmm.
been roughly plant based for 30 years. I've been vegan for about 8, 9. Wasn't an overnight transition. I could have been vegan 25 years. That was the first time I was introduced to the concept as a teenager. But what put me off was, as an impressionable teenager, somebody forcing the ethical side on me. Because as a slightly self-absorbed, testosterone-fueled teenager, my brain
Mm-hmm.
didn't go towards saving other animals. My brain went to, well, this person has just admitted they're on a load of medication for physical and mental health. I know for a fact they're poor. Their skin, they're not affluent. Means a lot to some teenagers. They're unhealthy. They're not, outwardly healthy in terms of they don't look muscular, they don't look athletic, they don't look good. Big bags fueled by coffee, all those sorts of things. And I'm thinking, why would I want to take on that lifestyle? You're trying to push this lifestyle as something that is going to be of benefit to me.
Mm-hmm.
How are you selling it?
Yeah. No, 100%. I'm torn on the topic, but part of me thinks that people that are going to not sell it, like you're explaining, maybe shouldn't even be trying to sell it. Somebody that is maybe 500 pounds and eats the most unhealthy vegan food, but is doing it for the animals. If they're on the street telling people to do it, like, I feel bad saying that. I mean, I'm personally overweight myself, but yeah. Anyways, I just I think there's a lot to it and it's complicated, but everybody will take in different information. And it's not as simple as there just being a right or wrong answer. It's
Mm,
also trying to figure out what's going to lead to the outcome that you want. And telling teenagers like yourself at that time certain things that won't lead to the right outcome. I just, yeah, I agree with you. I can't see any benefit there. But
mm.
yeah, I do have a couple minutes, if you do, for hearing your third on the being convinced in the health realm.
In the health realm, well, because the title of this is discussing protein, maybe let's have one about protein.
Yeah.
I'm convinced because of the amount of food diaries I've seen, 99.9% of vegans aren't eating enough protein.
Okay. What is enough protein?
Um, Depending on their goals, the minimum for me would be 1 gram per kilo of body weight. That's the
Okay.
minimum to survive. Now, when people say, "Oh, but I'm not died of protein deficiency yet," we've seen vegans make that joke. I've not died of protein deficiency yet, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like it doesn't work like that. You don't go deficient for eat under that amount for a week or two or even 3 months and suddenly fall over, but you're
Mm.
knocking years off your life.
Mm. Gotcha. Okay. And then let's see. Okay. And you mentioned for someone's goals. Now, would that only be that if you're, what would you view as a difference of how much protein having a goal of optimal health versus a goal of looking the nicest with the most muscles? Is there a difference? Would optimal health with exercise lead to a certain body composition that would look different than maybe what we could view as optimal aesthetics for the average?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. That's a really good question, Carson. Um, my brain instantly then went to what's the lowest possible recommendation. You'll not find anywhere anyone reputable suggesting that you can live off less than zero point 0.8 grams per kilo of body weight per day. You'll very, very rarely, if at all, I've certainly not found anyone that suggests more than 3 grams per kilo of body weight per day. And that's for people at the very top end of athletic exertion and probably supplementing with, hormone replacements to be able to speed up their metabolism and recovery and things like that.
Mm.
Teenagers, growth spurts, highly I suppose active, normally about 2 to 2.5 grams per kilo is the recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say somewhere in the middle would be a great starting point for someone who wanted to find out whether an increase or a decrease for them, depending on their starting point, is going to make them feel better.
Mm.
Because of the amount of food diaries I've seen where vegans are getting woefully low amounts. I've seen people come and fill out a food diary with me for a week and they're averaging 20 grams a day. So for them, what would happen if they suddenly increased to that minimum recommendation, maybe for their body weight, 60, 70, 80 grams a day, they're going to feel awesome. Their metabolism's all of a sudden going to kick into life. They're going to start to feel strong. They're going to start to feel a lot more emotionally stable. Their focus is going to improve. They're going to stop snacking between meals. Their body composition is going to change because they're going to suddenly have enough of the right building blocks to recover after exercise. They're probably going to be able to train to a higher standard and more intense because they're not just thriving off carbs and having sort of, peak crash cycles in their energy. So my recommendation, or sort of bouncing off your question, would be somewhere in the middle of the two extremes as a starting point, and then being systematic about what works for you. Do you need to increase? Do you need to decrease? Do you feel better if you increase? Great, have more.
Gotcha. Okay, then my last little detail I want to ask about, because I've heard mixed things on this. Do you base it on a healthy body weight for who you are, or do you base it on your current body weight? So if somebody is male and 6 foot and a good body weight for them is, say, I don't know, if you're 6 foot and male, maybe 185, but they weigh 285. Would you need more protein because you have more fat on you, or would your amount of protein, let's say it was 1.5 kilos, is it kilos? Is that how you or grams? Is it 1.5 grams? Anyways,
Yeah.
whatever it is, where the minimum would be 0.08 or 0.8, not 0.8, 0.8. But let's say for this person that you decided that you thought if they were 6 foot, male, and 185 was a perfect weight for them, that you would say 1.5 grams of protein a day. That same person, if they weighed 285, would you say 1.5 grams of protein a day?
Can I give you a slightly long-winded answer? I'll try and
Of
keep
course.
it under
Yeah.
2 minutes. Most of the time, I would recommend eating for the body you want. So if your goal is to lose or to gain, I'd say, well, try and aim for that target rather than the body that you currently have, because you might be under, you might be overweight, and that might skew your numbers. So that's most of the time. In reality, because people struggle with behavioral changes that are drastic, if someone came to me and they are used to eating 20 grams of protein in a day or 30 grams, but they should be eating 100 grams, for me to make a 300-something% change in their eating patterns is too much. Not just digestively, but also in their behavior. What, you mean my grocery bills are going to go, like, et cetera, et cetera? People can't sustain it and they struggle with it and they don't take it in and they almost kick back against it. Mm-hmm. So most of the time I would look at a very gentle progressive change over a period of a month, 3 months, 6 months, depending on the individual. So I would look at making really gentle sort of 5% incremental changes towards that goal. And I'd say, hey, at the moment you're on 30 grams of protein. I might not even tell them what their eventual target is. I'm going to say, we're going to increase this 5% every week, see how you are. And then I'd gradually move. Most of the time, just to be fully transparent, people achieve their target before they get to their sort of end goal with their nutrition, because they've eaten so badly beforehand. As soon as they start being mindful and tracking and sort of getting everything in place, they get 90% of the way there, if not all of the way there. If they've got the correct guidance.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, but what you would say, if you knew they were capable of it and people were better with their food addictions and whatnot, that you never need to eat more protein because you have extra fat on you. That extra fat will never affect it.
I honestly, and I'm going to be fully transparent because I've never come across that, I don't know what would happen if that occurred.
Okay. Well, because if you go to nutritionfacts.org, I posted a thing, you might have seen about it, where I posted my protein and what Michael Greger says, the calculation for how to, because his recommendation is the 0.8, but we can ignore that part. It specifically says for your ideal weight or your optimal weight for your height and gender or whatever. And somebody commented on there saying, I don't know if they read that part, but just commenting about how they basically said it's common knowledge that you would go off of your weight, not your goal weight. And I just, like, my intuition tells me that what Nutrition Facts says makes more sense, that you wouldn't like need more protein because you have 100 pounds of fat or 50 pounds of fat on you. And so since they said that, though, and a couple people liked their comment, I've never personally researched this. I figured I would ask some people that might know. It seems like it makes more sense to go for what the ideal weight would be for their gender and height.
In an all things being even scenario, I'm going to stick with Dr. Greger. But what I would say is there are one or two scenarios I can think of. Now you've put me on the spot. My brain's sort of firing. There's one or two scenarios where I've contradicted myself, and the person's weight hasn't been the thing that we're trying to change. Their body composition is.
Mm-hmm.
So in those scenarios, I would tend to go in with sort of almost like a much higher recommendation. And that might be a straight leap as opposed to that sort of incremental approach that I mentioned earlier. That's quite rare, though, when someone's like, okay, I just need to lose 1% of body fat and put on, 0.5% or 1% of muscle, and they're not really too worried about their overall body weight. Bit rarer, but it does happen. I'd have to take that as a sort of case-by-case approach. But I'm sort of tempted to agree with Dr. Greger, because he's probably 10 times more qualified than I am. And as a clinician, I'm sure he's done the more recent studies and read more recent studies than I have.
Gotcha. Yeah, for sure. Well, it's good to hear your thoughts from what you've experienced, and I'm curious to look into that further and find out. But anyways, this has been a great talk, and hopefully we can set up another one in the future.
I'd always be happy to chat, Carson. It's been a pleasure. Thank you everyone who's watching. I look forward to chatting more online. Take care. Have a great day.
All right. Take care.
Bye.